Welcome, and I just want to say thank you so much for doing this at the festival. I feel like I can hardly talk. I'm a little choked up. I came out of this screening of Ethel. I don't know if you got to see Rory's film on her mother, her family, and very powerful. And I mean, I've seen several films since I've been at the festival here, and part of what we're going to talk about and what I've been feeling is just, the theatrical experience. And that's what you get at a festival, and that's what you get in a movie theater. And it's such a powerful way to see a movie and such a powerful, compelling experience with an audience, to watch a movie with an audience. And I know this whole discussion about the Academy Awards is centering on that issue and theatrical projection of these films, and a lot of people have different opinions on it, and I'm, as a member of the Academy as well, I think what you've done, tried to do as a representative for the board, has really moved, I think, the discussion and where it should go in a positive way. And I guess we should start out by having you describe why you felt the need to do the changes and talk about what they are.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks, Chris, for doing this. And my apologies to everybody there that I couldn't be there in person today. I love this festival. It's one of the best festivals in North America, and everybody who works on it is to be commended. And I think also I want to say that the one thing you just brought up about our desire to have our films seen by audiences in movie theaters, that really should be the main issue of any real discussion. Should lead to that, at least, whether we're talking about specific rules for the Oscars or whatever. I always want to come back to, how can we get more documentaries in movie theaters? And how do we bring people into those movie theaters to see those documentaries? And I think that's crucial for the survival of this genre, this art form of nonfiction filmmaking, as it relates to those of us who make these films to be seen on a large screen and to be seen collectively with people in the audience. Because as you just said with the film Ethel, it's a very different experience seeing it with a couple hundred people than if you were just sitting at home watching it on TV or on your iPhone. So I'm a big supporter and proponent of those films that should be in theaters. Now, many documentaries are TV documentaries, and they should be on TV. And I've made both, and I think both are legitimate ways to go. Television reaches, obviously, a lot more people. The downside of television is that the audience is fairly passive. They don't have to engage. They can pause, go to another channel, go get a beer. Whereas, though fewer people go to the movies, it's a much more active and engaged audience. And for some of your films, some of our films, that's really the audience you want. You want those who are active and engaged, especially with some of these films, so that when they leave the theater, they will go out and do something. So I just wanted to preface this by saying that. Now, as far as the Oscars go, I am one of the three governors on the Board of Governors for the documentary branch. The other two are Michael Apted and Rob Epstein. And so we represent the feelings and interests and concerns of documentary filmmakers in the Academy to the larger Board of Governors. The governors are elected by the entire branch. And if I said to you that Steven Spielberg, Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, Woody Allen, none of them have ever won an Oscar, that would seem really bizarre, wouldn't it? In addition, of course, to not being true. But it would be odd, wouldn't it? Now, let me say this. Frederick Weissman, the Maisel brothers, D.A. Pennebaker, Chris Hegedus, Steve James. I could go down a very long list of people who've never won an Oscar, and many, like Al Maisels, Fred Weissman, who've never even been nominated. Now, how could that happen? How could the godfathers of our genre, the modern documentary, not even have been nominated or won in the past? Well, those who are familiar with the history of this know how this has happened. For many, many years, a small committee watched the documentary films. The committee was made up of volunteers from the Academy. They did not have to be documentary filmmakers or in the documentary branch. There was no documentary branch until about 10, 12 years ago. And so they would sit there with a 16 millimeter projector running, and after 10 minutes or 20 minutes, everybody had a little flashlight, and if you hit your flashlight, that would stop the projector, and you wouldn't watch the rest of the film. That's what happened to Roger and Me. That's what happened to Hoop Dreams. Many stories like this, where they didn't even bother to watch the rest of the film. And Roger Ebert, about 20 years ago, did a story on one of the reasons why this was happening. And in part, it was because who was on the committee. For instance, there was a documentary distributor on the committee. And according to Ebert, it turned out that between a third and a half of all nominated films were distributed by this documentary distributor who sat on the selection committee. In fact, in the year of Roger and Me, 1989, 3 of the 5 nominees were distributed by this man's company. So after Hoop Dreams, which had followed a long list of films that had not even been nominated, like Roger and Me, Shoah, Brothers Keeper, Paris is Burning, a whole long list of films in the early 90s. People, I think, had just pretty much had it, and reform started to take place. Unfortunately, for the next 10, 15 years, we stuck with the committee system, and only a small group of people, again, were deciding who the nominees were. And the way it worked was that you volunteered, and let's say you were on a committee that had 7 people on it, and let's say that there were 5 to 10 of these 7-member committees, and each committee was given 5 to 10 films to watch. And then you were to grade it between 6.0 and 10.0. What that meant was that if one of the 7 people who happened to get your film in their batch of movies to watch, if 1 or 2 of them lowballed it and just gave it the bottom 6 point, it would pull down all those who gave it a higher grade. And so literally 1 or 2 people could derail the chances of a film from even being nominated, from even making the shortlist. So when I was elected to the Board of Governors from our branch, this is one of the things I really wanted to fix. And last year I said, we should create a democracy movement within the documentary branch of the Oscars. We should bring democracy to our branch, meaning the entire branch should vote on who the 5 nominees are going to be. And then the entire Academy, all 6,000 members, should pick the winner from those 5 nominees, just as they do for every other film other than foreign films. So that means, as an Academy member, and Chris as an Academy member, you and I get to vote for Best Makeup, something I know nothing about, clearly. We vote, and people who are sound mixers and visual artists, visual effects artists, they get to vote for every other category. So everybody votes for every category except the documentaries and the foreign films and the shorts. The shorts have also changed their policy starting this coming year. They will now go to full democracy. And so I presented this. It was studied for a year by the executive committee, which is made up of about 22 documentary filmmakers in the documentary branch. And it was decided that it was time to let everybody vote and to join the Academy and be like all the other branches. Instead of the way I think documentaries have been treated, we're always sitting over at the children's table, the kids' table at Thanksgiving. And then at the big table are the real filmmakers. So, so the executive committee passed this unanimously, and then it was sent to the Board of Governors. They discussed it, and it was passed with a vote of, I don't know, something like 30-1 was the vote. So, so I thought this was a good idea. It has its, it has its drawbacks, obviously, because people are not going to be able to see all the movies that are made. But we're setting up procedures to guarantee that every film does get seen by somebody, and the Academy. I asked if they would shoulder the expense of sending every qualified movie to every member of the documentary branch, and they've agreed to do that. So in other words, if you made a documentary, you want to submit it this year for the Oscars that'll be handed out next February, your film will be sent to all 160 members of the documentary branch. And within that packet, we're asking everybody will be given a list of 5 to 10 films that we're going to ask that you at least make sure, and this will just be randomly picked so that every film is covered. Everybody will be asked to watch 5 to 10 films to make sure to at least that 5 to 10 pairs of eyes got on everything. We also changed it so that you can submit and will submit your documentary films when they're released throughout the year. So if your film comes out in June, we will get your movie in July. This way, the documentary branch doesn't have to watch 100 movies in December, like the way the Oscars, work now. We'll be able to watch these throughout the year. So that was the main thing that I wanted to get through. The other problem that we wanted to correct was that the larger Board of Governors, the Academy is set up to honor theatrically released movies. And if you notice in the fiction films that are nominated, none of them have been on television. They weren't made for television. They will eventually be on television, on HBO or PBS or whatever. But it's to honor those films that were theatrically released in the past year. And they were concerned that too many of our nominated movies seem to be films that were made for a television network and were qualifying by sneaking a quiet run in New York and LA, where they wouldn't be announced publicly and where they would not get a review, say in the New York Times or the LA Times, because they want that review to happen when the film premieres on the network in a few months. That they kept to the letter of the law in terms of the rule they followed, but not the spirit of it. They were really TV movies that weren't satisfied with just qualifying for an Emmy and winning an Emmy. They also wanted to win an Oscar too. And the larger Board of Governors of all the branches saw that and wanted this fixed. And so we grappled with this. How can we guarantee to the rest of the board that the movies that we nominate are movies that were truly theatrically made and theatrically released movies, even though many of our movies are funded by television, just as many fiction films are funded by BBC Films or Channel 4 Films, but they appear in movie theaters first. Then they go to the BBC and Channel 4 or whatever. So we came up with the idea based on this piece of information that we researched, and we were told by the New York Times that it is their policy to review every single film that gets a true theatrical release that opens in Manhattan, regardless of how big or small the film is, regardless whether it's fiction or nonfiction. That's their hard, fast rule. And we thought, wow, well, that is the way to guarantee that this is really, truly in theaters and theatrically released. Did it get a review in the New York Times, a paper that has a policy of reviewing every single film? So we thought this was really a good way to go to guarantee to the rest of the Board of Governors that these were theatrically released movies. But realizing that the New York Times is not infallible, and mistakes could be made, or Tony Scott's got a cold and doesn't make it to the screening down at the Film Forum of this documentary, and so it doesn't get a review. We instituted a very liberal appeals process where essentially all the documentary filmmaker has to do is say, hey, here's the day my film opened in Manhattan. There's no review in the New York Times, but here's the week the film was there. And then our attitude is, okay, well, you're in, you're qualified, you are eligible. We're not going to be sticklers about this. We're using it pretty much as a guidepost, and it's one of many guideposts that they use to guarantee that the film was actually in movie theaters. You have to show the movie theater ad. You have to do a whole bunch of things. So this got reported initially by the New York Times that somehow we were ceding control of who could get nominated over to the New York Times. And that is absolutely not true. We only picked them, we're only using them because of their rule. If they change that rule, they change that policy, then we'll change.
So some people said that it could be a little bit cultural imperialism as well, like ceding it, I suppose, the reviews to the coast rather than.
Oh, it is. It's not right. It's not right. Of course, I say that as someone from Michigan, so I'm biased. But the larger academy, though, for all the other movies, all the fiction movies, they have to play that week in New York or LA. So we're just lining up our rules to be totally in sync with the rest of the academy so that we're treated like a full and equal member, and so that documentaries are not looked upon as the bastard step cousin of cinema. And so the LA New York thing, which I'm not the biggest proponent of, is there simply because that's the general rule of the Academy for all movies, that it has to open for a week in New York or LA. So I think I've covered pretty much the changes. We're going to review them. We're going to send questionnaires out to everybody. We're going to be really on top of this for 2 or 3 years to make sure that this was the right way to go so that nobody gets overlooked. I know some people have said, well, the little film is going to get overlooked. But actually, the history of the Oscars for the documentary is that the little film has not been overlooked. It's the larger film that has been overlooked. And the joke pretty much was, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, that if you were critically acclaimed, if you got good grosses, if you were thought well of by the audience as one of the best documentaries of the year, that would be the kiss of death. You were guaranteed not to even get nominated. So it was a weird feeling to oh my God, we got all these good reviews. Oh, we're screwed.
Yeah, no, I definitely remember that too. In some ways, you felt like, okay, you're part of this club, this
right.
Elite club of
right.
your friends that are amazing filmmakers that you admired, but they also have been totally ignored by the
right.
Academy. And I know I felt that with Startup.com, which was recognized and it got a DGA award, but it was not even on a short list or anything for the Academy. And it did a legitimate theatrical run.
Sure.
And it was a film, and there's so many aspects of this to touch on and think about. A lot of your material and a lot of mine for totally opposite reasons. Quite often television isn't interested right away. You make very political subject matter. I'm sure a lot of TV stations aren't jumping for it right away, maybe more hesitant. We often make stories that they don't know what's going to happen, so they're not interested in it right away, or they're not hard-hitting subjects that fall into a certain category. And you do take a risk to put these in movie theaters, and movie theaters do perform that role for filmmakers where you can show films that are controversial or on subjects that television doesn't want.
Right, and yes, I would be, if there were not movie theaters showing documentaries, mine wouldn't be shown, I guess, not in this country at least. I don't get any money from any American network. British networks, Canadian networks, French, they will help fund me, but no American network will give me a dime, and no American network other than pay cable will show. Roger Me was on PBS, and that's the last film of mine that was on free broadcast television 20-some years ago in the United States. It's on the BBC and the CBC and Channel 1 in France, et cetera, in every other country. It's on their free television, but not in this country. So the movie theater is, it's a very good point you made. It's really critical for some films, especially those that are controversial or are trying to say something against the political norm in order to get distributed. Our lifeline are really these theaters, and not the theater chains, but the 300 or so art houses or independent movie theaters that are out there across the country that will show these films. And maybe I'll get into this a little bit later, but I'm an exhibitor too. I restored an old movie palace in the town I live in Michigan, and turned it into a nonprofit community group. And so the community owns it, and I program it, and I'm the head of the board and all that. But I've now seen our problem on the other end of this as the movie theater. So that has also helped to inform a lot of my feelings about this.
Which I think we should touch on more, but maybe I should see if people have specific questions about what you've just explained as the Academy changes. Does anybody have a question?
I do. Okay. How long have... How long has the guidelines been like this? Because I know they've just recently been changed.
The new guidelines began January 1st, 3 months ago.
I mean, when were the original guidelines set in place?
Well, the original guidelines were set in place when they started giving documentaries Oscars, which I believe was in the 1940s. So there was pretty much this committee system from the 1940s until December 31st of 2011. And I think it's always better to have more people voting as opposed to fewer people voting. It's not that it isn't a messy process. The cliche that democracy is messy, but I think you have a better chance with more people being allowed to have a say than just one or two people being able to kill a film.
Also, I think there's a lot of people in the Academy, and it's very few of them go to the screenings now because of the way that we have to vote for even the 5 chosen documentaries is during 3 nights or something like that.
Yeah.
And it's
Right.
so limited. I mean, it's a way to get documentaries exposed to a lot of people in the movie business as well, because I mean documentaries really still are the kind of poor stepchild of the Academy, and they're always one breath away from being there on the night of the technical awards that you kind of see fly in for a second on the Academy Award night and fly out. And that was really discussed not too long ago about moving it out, and luckily there was a lot of support for documentaries through the membership, but the whole thing is a process.
Yes, and those who want to remove documentaries from the Oscar show, they still exist in large numbers. They're not the majority right now. And one of the things I'm hoping to do with these new rules is to take away any of their ammunition. And one of the biggest things is that they don't get to vote on documentaries unless they happen to be in New York or LA during those 3 nights in January or February. I live in Michigan. Steve James lives in Chicago. Errol Morris lives in Boston. So that means we never get to vote unless we get on a plane or drive to New York City for those 3 nights. if you're working on a film right now, you won't be voting because you're not going to be able to go to New York for these 3 days to vote. It really limits the amount of people. And I said to the larger board of governors, I mean, that, you know, when we say that this film tonight, the Academy awards this Oscar to pick any, you know, documentary that's won, I said, is it really the Academy? Or is it the 200 people that watch these 5 nominated films in these screenings? Not the 6,000 member Academy. It's the 200 who've got that time and happen to be in one of those 2 cities. So that's over. As starting this year, there's no more that you have to be in New York or LA to vote on those particular nights. You will have screeners, and you will be able to watch them at home. We're going to start streaming them next year, so you can watch them that way. We'll still have the screenings in the theaters. We'll still do that because those of us who make movies for movie screens want people to see it on a screen. But it has limited the participation. And I think once we engage the rest of the Academy and get them voting, watching and voting for documentaries, first of all, when they see these documentaries, they're going to be blown away.
Exactly.
Because they're so good. And I get those who do come on those nights, and you know, hairdressers and editors, and they go, "Wow, this is really something." I said, "Yeah, I know." I think if we get more of these 6,000 engaged, the talk of removing documentaries from the Oscars, I think, will never come up again.
What is the criteria for somebody to submit a documentary? Is it open to like some of the public? Because some of us college students haven't graduated or accrued our degree yet, but you know, we can put together something pretty good.
You mean what's the requirement to be eligible to be considered for an Oscar?
Yeah.
Or to submit your film.
Yeah.
Or to even submit? It's open. This is open. Anyone who's a human being on the planet Earth can submit their film. A high school student, it's a documentary, and meets the qualifications. In other words, theatrically released in these 2, New York and LA. A 16-year-old could be nominated. Yes.
Yes.
Michael, how has the DGA either helped or hindered your cause?
The Directors Guild?
Yes.
Well, it has never hindered. I'm a member of the Directors Guild. All my films are signatories of the Directors Guild. So it's been. I don't think I understand the question. How would it hinder?
Well, by not supporting your position in the Academy, other directors coming to your cause.
Oh, I have not heard of anyone in the Directors Guild not supporting this initiative. In fact, I've heard nothing but positive and thank you. I don't know, have you heard something I haven't heard?
I just know how political it is, being a DGA member myself.
Yeah, well, yes, the DGA, like the Writers Guild, I mean, these are political organizations. But no, there's been nothing but support.
First of all, thanks for making the rule change, because it sounds like there might be a chance that more craft nominations will go towards cameramen and editors in documentaries who've done such amazing work over the past decade. Secondly, and also, I hope you're trying to get more lifetime awards to people like Penny Baker and Albert Mason and stuff, you know, that they do now, the governor's thing, like Corman received and a bunch of other people have over the past few years, now that they've made it a separate ceremony, you know, to get them the deserved recognition. But the big question I have, are you going to try to get Hellstrom Chronicles Oscar taken away from it? Because it's a fictional film. I mean, nothing mocks the documentary category more than the fact that you have a movie with a fictional character claiming to be an authority on this insect invasion, and it won the trophy. It's got the award, and you stand there and you go, it's not real. How do you, it's the Milli Vanilli of Oscar documentaries.
Yes, actually, Borat is more of a documentary than the Hellstrom. Because Sacha Baron Cohen filmed himself in every situation he was in was a real situation. So they were actually filming in a nonfiction way with a fictional character to make their points. You know, I hadn't thought of that. I know it's, and I don't think it's just the Hellstrom Chronicle. Certainly, Nanuka the North was considered really the first theatrically released documentary film. Much of that was staged with Eskimos. I mean, I don't know if the Academy wants to open up the hornet's nest of that. But they make a very good point. And if I could steal that Milli Vanilli line, I'm going to tell them that.
Does anybody else have a question? Yes?
Yeah, Michael, can you talk a little bit more about the streaming process? And is that just for nominated films, or is there going to be streaming available somehow to get films submitted in the first place?
Well, I think streaming has already started for documentary film. You know, there are many available through Netflix. You can get them through iTunes.
But in terms of making sure they go to the people who need it, who would be voting, you know, other than just saying they're there and they exist.
Yeah, no, every Academy member will be given their own password, and they will go on to a dedicated website where they and only they will be able to watch the film that way with their password. So that's how that will work. If you're asking in order to protect the film from piracy or whatever.
Well, just in terms of the prohibitive cost of sending physical screeners, I know is a lot and that can be a real barrier to getting your film out. So that's sort of
I think within the next 3 years there'll be no screeners going to the Academy of either fiction or nonfiction films. I think that's going to be phased out. And that's why these new rules are going to favor filmmakers who don't have any money. Can you hear me?
Yep.
The filmmakers who don't have any money, just take, when I made Roger and Me, and I made it while I was on unemployment, how the hell would I have been able to come to Doc Weeks? Where would I have gotten the $20,000 that I would have to pay Doc Weeks to have my film there so it can qualify? It never would have happened. I wonder how many films these days, especially with the technology that's in everybody's hands, how many great films we might be missing that are being made by poor people or lower income people who would never have the opportunity to sneak a film for a week in New York and LA by buying out a screen at a theater or by going to Doc Weeks. I mean, does everybody really, look, I'm a big supporter of the IFC. I belong to the IFC. The IDA. But is this right? I mean, can I ask that question on a moral and ethical level? Is it right that unless you have $20,000, you don't get to even be considered for Doc Weeks, and therefore you don't get to be considered for any of this? Is that right?
No.
I don't think it's right.
No.
I don't want the door to be shut on anybody. And in fact, I personally have been very lucky and have felt very privileged to be able to get my foot through the door some 22 years ago as a completely unknown person who was making $98 a week in Flint, Michigan. And with that happen, when that took off, one of the overriding thoughts in my head was that, well, I got through this door. I got to try and keep this door open as long and as wide as I can to get as many other people in through that door. And that has been my attitude, for the last 22 years, because I'm a big believer in nonfiction filmmaking, and I think when people go to see documentaries, if they'll go to see them, I think they generally have a very good experience with documentary films.
Michael, how would the new rules make the process sort of less cost prohibitive, though? If the goal is to kind of bring more people into this to this process. I mean, the cost of projection essentially are still going to be the same. I mean, with streaming, it sounds like it might become a little bit more feasible in terms of, getting the films out, or getting the film, out to the branch and the members. But is your hope that we can ultimately get to the point where, more sort of budding filmmakers can, do this in a way that isn't so costly?
You mean just to distribute your films, or are you talking about qualified?
Yeah, just to distribute.
Yeah. Right, because that's really the kicker. You've got to, how do I get a theater in New York or LA to show my movie, or how do I get a distributor to pick up my movie? Well, let me give what seems like an obvious answer, and I don't mean it with any snarkiness. Make a great movie. Make a great movie. If you've made a movie that is engaging and compelling, interesting, something maybe we haven't seen before, it's got interesting characters, it tells a good story, it makes people laugh, it makes people cry, gets people mad, makes people think. If you make that kind of documentary, that is your best chance of getting distributed.
And I think one of the advantages that you give, Michael, as well as being here, is if you make that great movie, there are these festivals that you can get into, hopefully, and there's so many of them that the buzz, the word gets out, and people do start talking about your film if you've made a movie, and all of those are stepping stones to, hopefully putting it in a theater.
Yeah, I mean that I got distributed my first film because I got lucky and got accepted to my first film festival, and at the film festival were people from the studios and distribution houses, and they saw the movie, and they saw the audience response to the movie, and I didn't have to hire anybody or do anything to make that happen. I had already done it by making Roger and Me, so I don't want that to sound conceited or anything. I hope, if anything, it acts as a guide to how you can make it with by making documentary films. And I think if you make a good movie, it has a good chance of being seen. And there's nothing wrong with a festival circuit, because your film could play 30 festivals and literally be seen by thousands of people. And frankly, I consider that a theatrical distribution. I'm in the minority on that at the Academy, but I think that if you play a certain number of festivals or whatever, I think that should qualify you for the Oscars, as opposed to having to open up for a week in New York or in LA. But I'm not in the majority on that opinion.
I mean, how do you take viral and take it to the theater? How do you make that jump?
Well, there's only two ways to get into the theaters. You have to convince a distributor to distribute it, or you have to self-distribute and work with the art houses and independent theaters to book your film. And either way will work.
So sweat either way.
Yeah, but I think if you put the sweat into making a kick-ass movie,
Yeah.
and a movie, remember, it's a movie first, not a documentary first,
A story.
not a political cause.
A good story.
A good story, just like, why have you chosen to be a filmmaker? If you're making a documentary simply because you're trying to get out the political word, and if you put the politics first, I don't think you're going to get people to come see the movie. People go to the movie on a Friday night because they want to see a movie. They don't go there for a political lecture. They don't go there for a sermon. They don't go there for anything they can see on TV. So you, by making a movie that you want in theaters, have said that I think I've made something that makes it worth your while to get a babysitter, to leave the house, to buy $10 popcorn, and commit a couple of hours of your very busy life to see my movie on a screen with 200 other people in the audience.
That's a good high bar. I like that. Especially the babysitter part.
That should be everybody's bar. And if it doesn't meet that bar, I'm not saying that you can't make an art film or an esoteric film that's intended for a very small audience that will be shown in art museums. I think that's fine. I'm just trying to be as populist about this as I can because I want as many Americans as possible to see these nonfiction films.
Do you feel that these new rules, because the majority of the folks who are watching it perhaps will be seeing it in future streamed into maybe their computers? I mean, what happens to a film like a Koyaanisqatsi, something that you know, where aesthetics are involved, we're hearing it through laptop speakers. Do you think the new rules will indeed favor political films, activist films, populist films in that? I wonder how aesthetics intersect with this question if the majority of the people are voting or seeing it in a way so far different than what a filmmaker may have intended.
It's a good question. I think that I personally think these movies should be seen in movie theaters, and people voting should see them in movie theaters. And I will advocate and encourage Academy members to take the time to go watch these movies. And we'll show them more than just those 3 nights, so that people have a chance to watch them. But I think the best example of what you're talking about is how did Peanut get nominated when the committee that saw it didn't see it in 3D and didn't see it in a theater. They saw it on a DVD, and yet they still nominated it. So again, I think I hear what you're saying, and I actually agree with it, but I don't think it will hurt the films that are more of the visually arty films, because I think that again, if the good story is there, like with Wim Wenders' film, it was nominated and nobody had seen it. I mean, you got to see that 3D to really get what he was trying to do, and yet it got nominated. People seeing it on their computers or on their home TV. So I wouldn't worry about any of this. I would only worry about making a great movie and trusting that usually in our society, the cream does rise to the top. That's not to say that there have been great artists and songwriters and filmmakers in the past that did not get the audience they deserved. That will happen, that will always happen. But generally, the good stuff makes it. And so make good stuff. And it doesn't matter where you're from or how much money that you have. Your name could be Adele. You know? But obviously she's the cream, right? Yes. Who the hell was she? How much money did she have? Nothing. But she had the cream.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Michael. That's a great ending. And thank you for making great films and helping the distribution of films and everything. I really appreciate it.